How can cyclists be more active in making their roads safer?
I think at its core is, get out there and use them. If we're using them, then, people will know that we're there and that we have a right to them.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Piaro, and you just heard from Dave Shellnutt, who's also known as the biking lawyer. Since 2020, he's been a legal force behind cyclists in southern Ontario. With his partner Joel Zanata, based in Vancouver, the pair cover a lot of ground advocating for riders. Here at Canadian Cycling Magazine, my editors and I often call on Dave when we need an expert quote or insight about road safety and cyclist rights. Dave is quite active in the community. The first time I visited his office, I foolishly locked my bike outside when I should have rolled it right in. Dave's space was busy as he was getting ready for Paris to Ancaster, where he'd not only have a tent for his practice, but he'd race too. Dave also does workshops, and he's behind the Bike Brigade, an initiative that gets food to communities in need. A little while after we recorded this conversation, Dave called out the president of the Toronto Blue Jays. Mark Shapiro wanted to see an end to one of the city's active transportation arteries so ball fans could have an easier time driving their cars to the game. You can imagine how Dave felt about that idea. He didn't agree at all. The main goal for my conversation with Dave is to bring you tips and advice for staying safe on the road and for what to do in a crash. Crashes are not a great subject. I love cycling on the road. I'm pretty sure you do too, but we have to be ready in case the worst happens. So here's my conversation with the biking lawyer. Dave Shellnutt, happy Bike Month.
Happy Bike Month to you too, Matt.
All right. It must be, I don't know, maybe it's a busy time for you. I just feel like cycling and cycling safety is very top of mind in June as, there's all these initiatives to get riders out. How does Bike Month change anything in your sphere as the biking lawyer?
You're totally right, Matt. It's busy and busy in good and bad ways. Bad because unfortunately we see influx of people having incidents with motor vehicles, but good in that we see a ton of bikes back on the road. People are dusting them off from their sheds or garages or condo locker rooms, getting them into the shops and out on the road. This morning we were down with Cycle Toronto for Bike to Work Day, bright and early at 7 a.m. So these are all good things.
Definitely. Now, tell me a bit about how the biking lawyer came to be. How did you, as a practicing lawyer, go all into the cycling sphere?
It is a longer story. I was practicing personal injury law at a big firm, and I was cycling in every day. And every day I'd come in and I'd be cut off and mistreated. And I would go to the managing partner of the firm who had his office beside me, and we were both in early. I'd complain about this driver or that driver, and he's like, "Dave, you're right. Just don't be dead right." And so from there, I gained that on the streets intimacy with what we're facing out there, and sort of combine that with my legal experience and tools that I had to sort of start saying, how could I help cyclists? How could I help myself out there? And sort of realize the things that I had no idea about, and figured that those were shared, at least in terms of rights, that cyclists were also unaware of. So it all started just with my commute, and then built on it for a few years. And then in 2019, got hit in a painted bike lane and broke my elbow and my wrist, and said, you know what? Nothing is certain in this life, and life isn't forever. And so made the decision to open my doors as the biking lawyer on January 1st, 2020, and bumped into a guy in BC who also was steeled in cycling advocacy by his commute and was a personal injury lawyer, Joel Zanata. We joined forces in July of 2020, and the firm, the Biking Lawyer LLP, was then formalized.
I imagine Okay, put it this way. Doctors, I guess the joke is they always get asked for free advice. I imagine when people find out that you're a biking lawyer, that you represent cyclists, especially in all the like hairy things that cyclists will see out on the road, that people almost instinctively say, dude, like this messed up thing happened to me on my ride the other day. It was so hairy. The motorist did this. Do you field a lot of those stories just like naturally when people find out what your job is?
My mentor and friend Pat Brown, who many of us know in the cycling community, advised me. He's like, Dave, if you're going to represent the community, you got to take the calls from the community. And I really believed in and took to heart what Pat said. And so we take all the calls, whether we can help or not. We know what it's like to be in a close call or feel unjustified in not being able to bring your bike up to your condo. So we at least talk, listen, and try and point people in the right direction if we can't help them.
Where I want to steer this conversation is to tips for all cyclists out on the road. But before we get into the tips, there is a particular case that I know you have a connection with. Well, more specifically, your partner, Joel Zanata, has a connection with out in BC. And it's the case of Ben Bolliger. He is a Vancouver cyclist. He was hit by a Mercedes-Benz in July 2021. The driver ran a stop sign at an intersection. Bolliger's right arm was broken, his bike was wrecked, and the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, or ICBC, the government-owned insurance company, found Bolliger to be 50% at fault, and he had to pay, or he was expected to pay $3,700 for repairs to the motorist's hood and windshield. Can you tell us more about this incident, which strikes most cyclists, I think all cyclists, it's fair to say, as absurd? Like, how can a cyclist be expected to pay for damages when he's hit by a car?
It is a wild case. And to bring it back to my own, when I was hitting the bike lane, the driver's like, "Are you a bike courier?" And I'm like, "No, man, I'm a lawyer." And like that rings true in Ben's case too, because they hit the wrong guy. This is someone who is deeply committed to cycling advocacy, safe streets, and the environment. And so this guy was hit, suffered serious injury, and then gets a bill in the mail for property damage that he was never able to argue over or fight to try and say that it wasn't his fault. And so, being the ardent advocate that Ben is, he took it upon himself to go after this sort of form of injustice perpetrated by the ICBC. And he and Joel from our firm teamed up, and they really pushed hard and got some changes. But the Ben's case is one in about 13 others of folks who've reached out to us with similar situations in BC, and it is absurd in Ontario and other provinces where you have the right to sort of litigate your bike crash or motor vehicle collision cases. You wouldn't have this sort of as readily a problem, I don't suspect.
Is it like a bureaucratic function? Actually, let's unpack that a bit, because that's what I thought it was at first, but I think it's come out since then. The case was before people at ICBC, and it was clearly, the cyclist should not be on the hook for this, but someone made the call inside that organization to say, we got to split this and put something on the cyclist. And I don't know if that's just for, well, again, the bureaucracy at work. It's like, well, if we're no fault, we have to be no fault, even as ridiculous as it sounds, kind of thing, or no matter what the ridiculous outcome is.
I think it's emblematic of a prejudice against cyclists that we see nationwide, whether it be an insurance company in Toronto, private insurer, police, in Hamilton, or the government insurer in BC. They have set up this insurance regime for motorists. And so if the motorist is all at fault, well, then it's the government insurer that's paying out all the damages. So I could see how someone in that boardroom would be like, well, let's not eat the whole bill on this and make a decision that, nope, the cyclist is at fault and let them pay. It's not coming out of the government insurer's pocket, but rather the cyclist directly, or his home insurer or something like that. and they can make those decisions, and they've taken away the ability of folks to fight them. For a $3,500 bill, where is Ben going to find a lawyer to do that? Lawyer rates are well over $100, $200, $300 an hour. And so even a letter or two blows back the price of the bill. So it's just, it's a really unfair system that's set up right now.
And in Bolliger's case, there is, some good has come of it, but there's also some threads that remain that are unsatisfactory. Can you tell us about the success that your colleague Joel had, and then some of the things that are still, let's say, not satisfactory about the situation?
Yeah, and they're still pushing. Ben just with Joel just did a Freedom of Information Act on these guys and got the decision making notes that you referenced earlier. So they're still at it, but with a bit of advocacy, Joel and Ben got the ICBC to no longer seek recovery in costs for certain situations, where a cyclist or pedestrian has suffered a severe or catastrophic injury where they've unfortunately died as a result of the collision. How you're going to send a bill to someone's dead family for, how that was even a thing before this that had to be cleared up, I've got no idea. And then finally, when the ICBC is unable to determine that it's not 50-50, because there's not enough evidence to determine what really happened, they won't, in a 50-50 situation, send the bill to the cyclist. Now, that sounds all well and good, but as we know, their decision making isn't the greatest. So what is 50-50 and who's making that decision? Maybe it's 60-40 and they send the bill. What's a severe and catastrophic injury? Now, that'll be in the legislation somewhere, I hope, but it still leaves open the door that a cyclist like me in BC who got a wrist and an elbow fracture, that may not be considered severe, and I may still get the bill. The ICBC system, and Joel's a heck of an advocate on this, is designed for motorists, by motorists, and it doesn't take in the unique vulnerabilities of cyclists and other vulnerable road users, and they should be taken out of this system into something more of a split, where they get covered for immediate benefits like in Ontario or Nova Scotia, and then they can litigate against the driver for the rest, because they're not paying into this insurance regime and not properly protected by it.
So in the case of a crash, now we're getting to the tips component. No one wants to be in a crash. And in a way, actually, I feel like I should back up because, you're a cyclist, I'm a cyclist. Pretty sure everyone who listens to this podcast is a cyclist. We all love cycling. We all have a certain comfort of being out on the roads. And this podcast isn't to freak anybody out, but there are things that can happen on the road, and we should, hope for the best, but get ready for the worst. And so in the incident of a crash, what is the number one thing that a cyclist should do in a crash involving a car?
Yeah, for sure. You just said it, Matt. This isn't to freak anybody out. We love cycling and we're out on our bikes, because it's liberating. It's great for us and all sorts of reasons. We're not sharing this information to scare people from riding, but rather empower them when they are riding. We believe that information and access to information is power. Whether you're involved in an unfortunate incident or you see somebody and witness, having this information is critical to either your safety or somebody else's. So we just want to pass it along. The number one thing, which I hope is obvious, but it's not when you're in shock, is to get safe, get off the road if you can, and seek medical attention. When I was hit in the bike lane, I just come through another recovery period, and adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I'm like, I don't want to be injured. I biked home with a broken wrist and elbow, and later had to go to the ER. That wasn't a great idea. So from my own experiences and that of our clients, we just want people to stick around, stick on scene, get an ambulance down there to check you out. I tell you what, if you go to the ER and you spend 3 hours there, 4 hours, and they tell you that you don't have a broken wrist, well, it's better than waiting to the next day, going to your family doctor for an hour, then getting a referral to an x-ray, and then waiting another day for that, and then going back. That's going to be more than your ER wait time. So you might as well just sort things out at the scene and at an ER afterwards. So that's number one. Number two is take photos. Photos of the guy's plate, the intersection, his license, his insurance information, as much photos as you can get. Get witness information. I took photos of where my handlebars went into the side of the guy's car when he turned right in front of me without indicating. Left a big black mark from my bar tape along the side of his car. And then I went and later reported it to police, and he went to a different reporting center the next day and reported it as well. Years later in our lawsuit, he brought out these pictures and he's like, well, no, Mr. Shellnutt just bumped into me at a red light and was the cause of the accident. Nothing happened. And he had these photos where my black tape was cleaned right off the back of his car. And that's how he went to police to report the incident. But thank goodness I took my photos, and that quickly sorted out how the crash happened and that this guy was a liar. And finally, you've got authorities down there, you've taken your photos. When you're able to, in your home, contact a lawyer that the community knows and trusts and get advice on what entitlements you have and what you should do. Witness information is critical if you can get it. Get phone numbers, email addresses, get them to take pictures if you're unable, if you're on the road and sort of, so you've done your knee and you're not able to get up and take photos, which happens all the time. Get bystanders to help you. In many of our cases, it's bystanders, witnesses, other cyclists who stop and are critical to how the case resolves years down the line. Also be mindful of video cameras in the area. If a convenience store or a gas station's nearby, make a mental note of that and tell your lawyer about it so that they can get any video footage. A video is worth 1,000 words or something like that,
This episode of the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is supported by MS Bike. I can think of a few reasons why you should do an MS Bike event. The big one? You'll help those with MS. Canada has one of the highest rates of MS in the world. Another reason is that it doesn't matter if you're a new cyclist or have clocked thousands of clicks on your bike. An MS Bike event is for everyone. In July, there's a ride from Leduc to Camrose, Alberta. Over in Ontario, there's Grand Bend to London. Finally, your fundraising efforts can also get you cool rewards, such as MS Bike t-shirts, shorts, and new this year, an MS Bike jacket to round out the kit. You can make a difference. So head to msbike.ca, register, and start fundraising now. As we've been talking, I know I've been really careful to use the word crash and to avoid the word accident. I feel like a lot of us, our knee-jerk reaction is to call it an accident. Yet it is important. There's numerous places, numerous institutions that their guideline is don't call it an accident, call it a crash. Can you remind us or tell us what the importance of using these two different terms or the significance of these two different terms are when there is a bike crash out on the road?
Yeah, you often hear the phrase language is important. It's important in how we talk about a number of topics, race, gender, equity on so many levels. It's also important in how we address road violence. And this is something we've been doing for years. We, in our statements of claim for injured cyclists, which are court-filed documents, I haven't used the word accident in probably close to a decade. It's collision and crash, because the term accident implies that these crashes were not preventable, that no one was at fault, and nothing could have been done to prevent them from occurring. In other words, they were freak accidents that rarely happen. Unfortunately, that's just simply not true. These collisions happen because of inattentive drivers, dangerous roadworks, texting, drinking, you name it. Lack of safe infrastructure and speed. They're not like some freak accident. So it's important that we call these things what they are, preventable incidents, because if they're preventable, it means we can do things from stopping them from happening in the future. And that's what we're deeply committed to, not just cleaning up the mess of these crashes, but preventing them in the future.
Is there anything to be done about those moments on the road that I'll stick with my own language here that are downright hairy, but you don't get hurt? Is there something to be done? Something that I should do? And if I'm like, oh, that really sucked, but I'm okay. I'm just going to keep riding. What should I do in those situations?
Anyone that's out on the road, sadly will know that these situations happen a lot. And you probably have a part-time job at least reporting to your local police about all these incidents. But, for me and for others that I know, if there's something that's particularly egregious, you check with your local municipality and the local police force and see if they have an online reporting tool. Many do for dangerous driving. You get that plate number, get the make and color of the car, and if you can, a description of the driver and what happened, and plug it into their site. Now, it's unlikely the police will call you or do much about this, but it creates a statistic, and those are statistics that we can use to influence policy down the road. So on a community level, I think there's impact. Individually, I have to think that if a driver does something like
coal roll someone, that's more of an extreme example, I would say.
But someone who has a propensity to drive poorly or very poorly in the coal rolling example, they're going to continue to do it, and someone's going to get really injured at some point. It's a fact. It's not a question. And so you got to think that enough people reporting on this person's poor behavior would eventually impact sentencing. Now, we can talk for days about how that's too low for incidents involving vulnerable road users. But I think there's merit in reporting on individuals, at least for our own community safety and advocacy efforts.
Right. I think I can appreciate that. It's more of a long game, but it's also, to paraphrase what you've said, it's for community and it's beyond the individual at this point. And it's a matter of you're working together to make these roads safer.
Exactly. And bikemaps.org is a great way if you have very little regard for what the police will do in the situation. You can, and even if you want to do both, you can go to bikemaps.org and fill in the interaction. And if there's enough sort of blips on the Bike Maps radar, they can use that for advocacy in your local community.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That is, I believe, a Victoria initiative, bikemaps.org.
Yeah, they're the folks based out of UVic, and we've partnered with them this year to share crash data and encourage reporting in Ontario for the long game, as you say, to help us use what's happening to prevent it.
Part of my job is testing new tech, and I recently mentioned it to you, a new gizmo I got, because of its safety bent. And I want to pick up on some of our discussion here. This is Garmin's new Varia rear radar light, and it now has a camera, a rear view camera. My question to you is is this stuff actually useful? Is this useful to be capturing footage of what's going on behind me? It adds a bit of weight to my bike. So if I'm being a total weight weenie, I'd be like, do I really want... I have lighter bike lights I could run. However, to sort of give away the answer, I'm still using this device, even though most of my testing is done. I could run lighter stuff. So what is the importance? And you kind of mentioned this earlier, but maybe remind us, what is the importance of having video footage, even if it's from the rear view of my bike?
Yeah, it is should the unfortunate occur, it is a great resource or form of evidence to demonstrate that you weren't at fault. And particularly, we see this in hit and run cases. It's very valuable to have that license plate of that person that you can give to police, or we have investigators that can run the plate and find them and just identify that someone did hit you if you were sort of left unconscious by it. We have some other cases where cyclists will be hit from behind and suffer a head injury and not remember what happened. And then the driver then says, well, the cyclist veered into my lane and I couldn't help but hit them. And, while we know that that isn't true without video evidence, it's a bit more of a fight. Whereas using the Garmin or a comparable model to pick up a plate or pick up what's happening behind you can sort of put those questions to bed.
You're actually working on a case or have a case in front of you where that's exactly what happened. The motorist has one story, and the cyclist, if I remember correctly, wasn't even going to report what happened or wasn't going to pursue anything because he didn't know if, in fact, he veered in front of the vehicle or not.
The police took the other driver's story, or the driver's story, and said to my guy when he woke up in the hospital, yep, you were at fault. The guy said you veered into him. No, we're not going to charge you for this. And so he thought, well, I'm at fault, so I can't possibly claim anything here. And that simply in Ontario is not true. And in some other provinces, there's a reverse onus provision in the Highway Traffic Act, which means that the vulnerable road user, cyclist or pedestrian, is presumed not to be at fault, and the driver is presumed to be at fault. So while the police may not ticket them in a civil court, the driver has to show that they were not negligent and didn't cause the crash. So, that's one thing that folks just don't know a lot about. And, we see people hit, don't know what happened, like this guy. And while the camera would help them, just being aware of their rights, that they can still pursue claims despite there may be some contributory negligence or differing stories is something we really want people to know as well.
Tell me about dooring. Now, this is something that, a lot of cyclists either has happened to them or, they've become really good at keeping distance from parked cars and having to swerve every once in a while. But the in Ontario, at least, since you've been working, dooring and its relationship to the police and insurance has changed a bit. Can you tell me about how that's shifted?
Yeah, Matt, I would say it's probably my biggest fear when I'm on the road because it's so unexpected. You can ring your bell as much as you want, but if someone's not paying attention and they got the windows done up because it's winter or the AC is blasting and they throw that door open, well, there's nothing you could have done. Yeah, so in Ontario, there's, I think the Star or other news outlets did a great job reporting on this stuff and showing that it was like a really big problem, and that people were getting hit by this sort of careless maneuver in droves, and that means injured people, and so I think 2018 the law was changed to make it a penalty for dooring someone and make it a tougher penalty with some demerit points. But then what we were finding is that even though insurance companies were sort of taking dooring seriously as collisions between or a motor vehicle collision, even though the motor vehicle wasn't driving, police weren't. If you got in a crash with a car that was moving, the police would give you a motor vehicle accident report, and that would have insurance information that let you access no fault benefits. No fault, let you just get on the road to recovery. Everybody's entitled to them. But if you were doored, they would hand you this other incident report, which didn't have the insurance information. They'd say, well, go do an FOI request and get it. And so your person with a broken ankle would head on down to police headquarters and do an FOI request. And often it would come back with the insurance information redacted. It was a frustrating circle. And so we made a fair amount of stink about it and wrote directly to police chiefs and premier and attorney general. And to our chagrin, it kept happening. Now, the province had changed the law again to include dooring as a motor vehicle collision or accident, as they term it. But in certain municipalities, Toronto being one of them, the police hadn't adopted that change. And so I had a nurse who had been serving folks with COVID in long-term care facilities get doored and suffer serious ankle injury requiring 2 surgeries. And they wouldn't give me the information that he needed to get in-home care, PSW support. I pointed to the Moms Act and said, guys, you're in contravention of the law here, and wrote a stern letter. And finally, with some cajoling, they decided that, we'll get on side of the law here and start giving cyclists the information that they deserve and need.
How can cyclists be more active in making their roads safer?
I think at its core is, get out there and use them. If we're using them, then, people will know that we're there and that we have a right to them. But aside from that sort of more meta response, I guess, is, join your local advocacy organization, work on the campaigns to push and encourage municipalities to make safe, segregated infrastructure, that advocate for safe streets. These organizations across the country are doing incredible work. We were talking about Doring. Nova Scotia had some of the same problems in 2017, and through a lot of advocacy by Halifax Cycling Coalition in 2020, they were able to get changes to the former Highway Traffic Act, now the Traffic Safety Act, put in place, where enduring is now a prohibited and finable offense. So these organizations, be it in Halifax, Hamilton, Regina, are the ones doing the work. So get in line, support them, and get out there and ride.
Because of your job, you spend a lot of time looking at cases or instances when things go bad. You see tragedy and injury a lot, I imagine. But despite that, can you see if things are generally getting better for cyclists, or are they getting more challenging?
It's a great question. I think the answer is gray. In some ways, we see a lot of success. The pandemic, with all its downsides, brought about what we call cycling revolution. More people on bikes, more cycling infrastructure, things we'd asked for a decade, put in place finally. So some real positive changes, where I was hit in a painted bike lane, and where a client of mine was doored in a painted bike lane, two different parts of the city. There are now segregated concrete barriers there that would have prevented our injuries, and it will prevent future injuries in those places. So we're making headway. We're doing great. In the same vein, the entitlement and individual concern for individual time, like your own time, and going to Costco or dropping the kids off at soccer, is really trumping collective safety. People are driving super dangerously. We have laws that don't properly penalize you if you have seriously injured or killed somebody with a motor vehicle. It remains a huge problem. People killing cyclists in essentially walking with a slap on the wrist. They say if you want to kill someone, do it with a car. It's morbid, but it's a reality. It's how you get away with murder. Not in sort of to like bring it back from the more serious instances. We're finding that like the pandemic's been really hard on people. Tempers and aggressions are high. We really feel that out there, and we see it on the streets. And so while we make gains, we're constantly getting pushback as well.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you brought up, or to me, it's interesting you brought up that scenario of like that sort of individualistic, I gotta get here now. Like I have to drive whomever to, like you said, soccer, or I gotta get to the mall or the department store. And this is what I've always struggled with, is that it's traffic. It's a collective endeavor. You are not in a solo time trial, whether that's on a bike or in a car or whatever. There's other people around. We're working together on this, and it's so easy to forget that in a car with your immediate demands of like, I gotta be over there now.
Yeah, we've really. What is someone on Twitter is great for cycling folks, and the other day maybe it was even today, said something really incredible about like, if you're in gridlock in your car, you are gridlock. You're not in traffic for any other reason that you are contributing to it. So I thought that was great. But something about our culture of cars and car being king in Ontario and North America particularly really prioritizes the rights of the individual and the motorist over all else. We've seen great pieces done by the War on Cars about how freeways, disenfranchised entire neighborhoods and communities, particularly Black folks in America. And up here, we certainly have some of the same issues. Making speedways to get to Costco come at the expense of green belts and these kind of things. So we've really prioritized this sort of mode of transportation above all else, and especially like clean and equitable living. And so we've got some really deep societal questions to ask ourselves and problems to address. I'm confident that we can, but it'll take time. The violence we were talking about is rooted in toxic masculinity that pervades our society. We've got to unlearn this stuff. I was a young driver, and I did not drive appropriately at those ages, And, you were told to go get your driver's test at the place where you could pass, go do it out in the countryside so you didn't have to get caught up on failing to learn how to parallel park or something. Well, like, that's just the wrong idea. We want kids to be experts and believe that safety and rules of the road are important. If we encourage them to dodge and dip out of these things, and that's how we get an entire population that just drives recklessly and with lack of concern for others' safety.
What are changes that can make roads safer for cyclists? I mean, let me re-ask that question because that's just so broad. But like, what are changes that you want to see or that you would hope to see that would put you out of a job?
That is the goal. Joel and I, we dedicate our firm is individually focused on our clients, but at all times we're pushing for community advocacy, safety, and change. So yeah, what are some things? I really think automation of enforcement is a big one. Why we don't have cameras ticketing folks for blowing by streetcar doors or bus doors or parking in bike lanes, and then using those resources, the funds that come in from there to then build segregated infrastructure is beyond me. These are simple solutions that can put a pile of money in the public coffers and assure the driving public that their tax dollars from their gas guzzlers aren't going to pay for our bike lanes. They're parking in our bike lanes, maybe, but that's a give and take kind of thing. We want to see that. We need to see our leadership, municipal, provincial, change laws, put tougher penalties, because that's going to signal that we treat driving as a privilege and not a right, and that it's not paramount to our society.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate this conversation. It's got, I hope it gets everyone thinking out there. Our conversations that we have, like we bug you all the time at Canadian Cycling Magazine when we need some, maybe not legal advice, but we want your take on things that we see out on the road. It's always enlightening. Thanks very much. And hope we talk again.
For sure. It's always a pleasure to connect with you guys. We are all part of this community. And we share the same tales and same experiences. And so talking about those things can help us move past them and back into the joy of cycling. And, though I was hit, the first thing I looked at doing was, how can I ride with my wrist brace? We all share this love for cycling. So like to be able to gripe and sharing the bad times is equally as important sharing the good. And I appreciate you folks for that.
Right on. I think that's the perfect note to end it on. And we'll talk later, Dave.
For sure, Matt.
And that's the episode. It's written and edited by me, Matthew Piaro. I had help from web editors Matt Hansen and Terry McCall. This episode of the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is produced by Adam Killick. He composed the music too. Thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. And thank you for listening. Please rate and review the show, ride safely, and I mean that. Have fun, but be careful out there. and I'll talk to you later.